Hey Axis and Allies players, this is the Good Captain. Welcome to my second video in the Axis and Allies Classic series. Today's video is titled Winning, and we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the victory conditions in Axis and Allies and their implications on the game. For those of you with the rule book, you'll want to open to page 22. Open your book to page 22, I should say. And this is where the victory conditions are. And the Allied victory conditions are listed first, followed by the Axis victory conditions, and they're basically the same until you get towards the end, and that is to capture 2 capitals as either side. However, the Axis have an alternative victory condition, and that's called the economic victory, where the combined Axis income of Japan and Germany is totaled up at the end of any world turn, at the end of every world turn, and if they reach 84 IPCs, then they win. The end of the world turn is the end of America's turn. So at the end of America's turn, Japan and Germany should kind of get used to counting up their total and seeing where they're at. So I'm going to make an assertion here, and that assertion is that 99% of Axis victories in Axis and Allies Classic come via the economic victory condition. It is highly unlikely that the Axis players will capture 2 capitals before they attain 84 IPCs. And in fact, you don't need any capitals to gain this type of victory. And that's important. That is an assertion I hope to prove over the course of the video, and I think it's important to have a good understanding of where you stand at the beginning if you're the Axis. So we're going to keep our Axis hat on as we go through this victory condition because they really are the ones who are driving the game. So in terms of the economic victory, Germany starts with 32 IPCs and Japan starts with 25 IPCs. So that's a total of 57 IPCs. The Allies start out with a combined total of 90. This, if you do the math, obviously is 147 of IPCs on the board, right? So that's going to come up later, but there's 147 IPCs on the board, 90 controlled by the Allies, 57 controlled by the Axis at start. This means that all things being equal, the Axis need to gain 27 IPCs without losing any to attain the economic victory. It's tough to do, but it's a little more, in my opinion, that secondary option gives the Axis a much needed alternative to victory that the Allies have to be highly aware of. And again, on the Allied capitals bit, unless the American player or the United Kingdom player just completely leaves a capital open and forgets about a German transport that's in range, neither of those powers should be lost to the Axis before the 84 IPC cap is hit. Now, if you accept the premise that 99% of Axis victories come via the economic victory condition, the next natural question is, okay, where do we get these IPCs from? And for this, I like to first answer the question, where are they not? And I look at areas that are attainable and sustainable. Attainable in that geographically Germany or Japan can actually get them, and sustainable in that they are actually something they can hold on to for more than a turn. So although raids in Mexico, Alaska, Panama, and Brazil by the Japanese might be interesting and perhaps necessary at the end of the game, or mid to end game, we're looking at the first 4 to 6 turns as the Axis here, and we're going to go ahead and just exclude all the IPCs on the American continents. That's all the IPCs located on the board edges. That's 35 from Alaska to Brazil and everything in between. That's 35 IPCs we're just going to not count in terms of trying to attain and sustain as the Axis. We're also going to exclude both capitals, United Kingdom capital and the Russian capital territories. So that's another 16. So that's 51 IPCs that we are excluding. The rest of the IPCs, however, are fair game. There's 39 IPCs left that I consider attainable and sustainable. And where are they? So remember, you needed 27 to get the victory, and you have 39, excluding all the capitals and the Americas. Well, I break the map into 4 areas. when it comes to the rest of the IPCs available in the world economy here, and that is East Front, where there's Karelia and the Caucasus. Again, this is all things being equal, assuming the Germans and the Japanese basically hold their value. Where can they increase? So, and of course you'll be exchanging territories, so don't get too wrapped around the axle with that. But you can expand towards the East Front for 6 IPCs, right? You can, Africa here, not including Syria, Iraq, or anything east of it, but the Africa continent, including Madagascar, is 10 IPCs, right? So 6, 10. Then starting in the Middle East and going all the way to the Soviet Far East, this is the most resource-rich area of the board here at 19 IPCs. And then lastly, you have 4 IPCs in what I call the Pacific Rim. That's Hawaii, New Zealand, and Australia. And so these are the areas that the axis can actually geographically attain and potentially sustain. Sustain in more than one turn, right? These wouldn't be just raids, or they have the potential to not just be raids into enemy territories. You can actually hold some of this ground, potentially. So, given that Japan is so close to Asia and Germany is so close to Africa, and there being 19 and 10 IPCs here respectively, these are the areas that both powers should be heading into. If you do something else as the axis, I don't know how you will win. In fact, I would say I've seen a German player pull the Germans out of Africa because he said he didn't want to deal with it, and he reinforced the Eastern Front. That I knew the game was over as soon as that happened. You got to gain IPCs or the Allied economy will smother you, right? The Axis start out with less than 2/3 the economic strength, and so allowing the British to have Africa is just unacceptable. The Germans must, economically speaking, you've got to drive down in here and grab up these IPCs. So, if you accept that Japan goes this direction, Germany goes this direction, and this isn't to say that Germany should ignore the Eastern Front, not at all. In fact, that really is kind of the priority. It should be looking east always, and trying to create a stalemate if nothing else. What's a good mile marker on the way to this 84 IPCs? How do you know if you're proceeding at a decent rate? Well, I like to use what I call the tipping point, and what I refer to as the tipping point is exactly half of the world economy. And remember, there's 147 total IPCs on this board, and so half of the world economy is 73 or 74 IPCs. So that's what I'm really driving hard for, is the Germans and the Japanese in the first 3, 4, 5, 6 turns, whatever, as long as I can keep the momentum going, that's the number I'm really trying to get to just as soon as I can. And why am I doing that? Because that means there is a turn where I collect 73 IPCs at the end of that turn, you've hit economic parity with the Allies. In other words, you're producing, or at least making as much money as they are. And yes, I know some territories can be counted twice, produced twice, like for instance, Britain could collect off of India, then Germany or Japan could come in and take India and collect off of it as well. But again, just talking in strictly numbers terms. If you have a turn where you and Germany and Japan basically collect 73 of these sustainable, attainable IPCs, you're in really good shape. You're in good shape. And if you can sustain that 73 or 74 IPCs, then you don't have to think so much about territory expansion as the Axis powers. Yes, eventually you want to get the 84 that you need for the win, but there's less pressure, let's say, to push hard into areas where there are IPCs to take them away from the Allies to balance the economy. You've got the balance. Now you can focus on maybe destroying units, maneuvering your armies, building up infrastructure. It's just a way of thinking about it. Also, the Russian player generally is worried about Japan and Germany constantly, and they should be. They should be in a nutcracker. It should feel like they're in a nutcracker. But the Axis can win without having to take the Russian capital. And so if the Germans and the Japanese work together to influence the middle of the board here, remember all they need is 27 for the win, and there's 19 here and 10 here. So if they control enough of this board, they'll win without having to go into Russia too deep. They'll still have to get up to the border territories of the Russian capital. But anyway, I hope that sheds some light on the economic situation. The reason I wanted to devote a video to this is, again, my inspiration being Don's essays on this subject. He mentions the economy not at all He mentions quite a bit on tactics, and there are some key strategies in those essays, but I don't think the word economy, at least in terms of actual raw dollars and digits, is mentioned once. And so I wanted to try to put anybody, this is mostly, it's for anyone really, just the way I think about it, kind of a bean counters version of looking at the victory conditions. But anybody really coming out of Global or Anniversary who hasn't really played Axis and Allies Classic, just to give you a perspective before maybe going into a game. Okay, so that's the Axis victory conditions, and what do I say about the Allies? Well, the Allies really are going to be focused on containment. If they see that the Axis players understands this hard and early expansion, then the Allies should be not, I don't want to say reckless in their counterattacks, but they should be taking, they could be and should be taking some risks to slow them down. Every turn you slow down, especially with India, any turn, because it's such a high IPC value territory, any turn that you're slowing down the Axis and preventing them from collecting a whole lot of income is another turn that you're collecting that income, and on a long enough timeline, given between mediocre players, the Allies will basically always win if the Axis can't get their act together and get going quickly. So containment as the Allies, containment, containment, containment. That's all I really wanted to say about the victory conditions and the Axis take on it, and my take on the Allied strategy of it is really just containment. But there is one other area that I wanted to cover, and that is right here. In terms of winning, the title of this video is winning. I can't leave this video or wrap this video up without talking about these, and this is the weapons development. This is one of the few versions of Axis and Allies that this is not an optional rule. This isn't presented as an optional rule. These things exist. Tech dice in this game are 5 IPCs per dice. When you roll, you have a breakthrough on a 6, and it's completely random which one you get. It's just this one tech column here. And I used to think this was kind of a broken part of the game, but I played somebody who played it once, and it made me kind of break out into a cold sweat. And the situation was that I was the Axis, and I had been on the right side of the tipping point, as in past 73 or 74 IPCs for a couple of turns, or not even a couple of turns, I think just maybe a turn. Anyway, the guy, my opponent, had seen the writing on the wall and said, I feel like I'm kind of losing. And it was the United States player's turn. I had just done Japan. He was a United States player, and he said, you know what, I'm going to take all 32 IPCs of mine, I'm going to invest it all in tech dice. So he bought 6 tech dice, and he threw all 6, and I was thinking, oh great, game over. He'll throw these, and I walk away, it's over. He threw all 6, and he got 2 breakthroughs, and then I realized what he was trying to do, because on Great Britain, he had 3 bombers at that time, and now, with those 2 breakthroughs, he had a 33% chance of getting heavy bombers, which turns each of his bombers basically into 3, because they would throw 3 dice on any attack they made. This would give him the option of just crushing the German economy if he decided to do strategic bombing and I wasn't successful in shooting any down with AA, or he could have heavily influenced any American attacks really anywhere within range. So I broke into a cool sweat and felt myself very fortunate when he rolled for industrial technology and jet power, which, although interesting, actually I think those are probably the two of the weakest of the 6 there, but so it was game over. But anyway, what I took away from that, and what I would like to impart to anybody watching this video, is I wouldn't walk away from an Axis and Allies game that I felt like I was losing without throwing for tech dice in the last couple turns. So I would probably, just to keep it interesting, and in that situation, it very well could have turned the tide, and perhaps turned the tide. So, and I think that's kind of neat. I liked that. Got my blood going there a little bit at the end when I thought it was all done. And I kind of like that. I think that might have been what Larry Harris had in mind when, if he was designing this game. If you think about Germany at the end of World War II, they would have been throwing some tech dice, right, trying to turn the tide. So that's all I had to say about weapons development. This pretty much wraps up my video on winning. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick review with you all. And I just wanted to review that there are 147 IPCs on the board. The Axis start with 57, the Allies start with 90, and really you want to take away 16 IPCs from the Allies as the Axis to get to your 73, which is the economic parity, or the tipping point. And as the Allies, you don't want to lose that 16 IPCs. You want to watch out for that, because if you do lose 16 IPCs, now you and the Axis are equal in terms of economy, and a huge advantage that you had started with is gone. So where do these IPCs come from? Where do these key 16 IPCs come from? Well, they exist in 4 areas, and the first one is Asia, where there's 19 IPCs, including the Middle East. Africa, where there's 10. The Pacific Rim, Hawaii, New Zealand, and Australia, where there are 4. And by the way, don't just toss this one out. This can be very important. They're down there, fairly exposed, and very attainable and sustainable by the Japanese, especially come turn 3 or 4. So don't just knock that out because it's only worth 4, or don't think you don't need it. And then the East Front, which I consider to be the most expendable, perhaps even I might write that off as not sustainable. So this concludes my video on winning. Hope to see you in my video number 3, which will be an orientation to my board and the modifications that I've made to my game, Axis and Allies Classic. Thanks for watching this. All the best from the good captain, and bye-bye. Hey guys, good captain here. One more PS, as it were. One thing I wanted to mention was that, just to point something out in this rulebook, that an individual winner can be declared in Axis and Allies Classic. This is basically the only optional rule in the actual 2nd edition rulebook, because it uses the word can. An individual winner can be declared. It's not that it must be declared or that it is declared. And you do this by determining which player has increased his or her national production level the most from the starting totals. And they give you some charts below to sort of rate, to get a prorated rate of expansion. It's based completely off income. So yeah, I mean, I think the purest way of playing this is with 5 individual people. And if I had 5 individual people, I've never actually done this with 5 people around a board, but encourage an individual winner. There's 3 Allied players, there's only 2 Axis players, and this could help the Axis a little bit, I think, because there is a higher chance for a competitive player on the Allied team just by dint of the fact there's more people there, but also the Allies have to be more interdependent than the Axis, at least at the beginning of the game, at least the first 4 to 6 turns or so. They can be very dependent upon each other, and so Britain might be, or United Kingdom, or the United States might be, less encouraged to go reinforce Russia than to take Western Europe or Southern Europe or attack somewhere else that might be more profitable for it. So it could open up some interesting options. I just wanted to point that out in the rule books and let you guys percolate on it yourselves. But anyway, just wanted to add that as a touch up. Okay, thanks. Bye bye.